So last week I said I'd try to talk about binding and loosing. So I did some research, and there are several different manners in which things are bound and loosed. So the first binding and loosing, which is asar and natar, that's what those Hebrew words. It's a Mishnaic phrase that's mentioned in the Besorah as well as the Targumim. In usage, according to Encyclopedia Biblia, to bind and to loose simply means to forbid and to permit. Isaiah 58, 5 and 6, for instance, relates proper fasting to loosening the chains of injustice. Poseks, by virtue of their ordination, have the power to decide disputes related to Jewish law. This is best seen in the general difference between the two main schools of Jewish thought in early classic Judaism. The school of Shammai binds, the house of Hillel loosens. Theoretically, the authority of the poseks actually proceeded from the Sanhedrin, and there is therefore a statement in Makos 23b that there were three decisions made by the lower house, the Sanhedrin, to which the upper house, the one in heaven, gave its supreme sanction. This rabbinic authority was essential in maintaining the community's cohesion and its adherence to the Jewish laws and our customs. They claim that whatsoever a disciple binds or loosens on earth shall be bound or loosened in heaven, which comes from Mattisyahu 18:18, is attributed to Yeshua. The expressions binding and loosened employed here are this: one who declares a thing to be prohibited, it is said to be bound, and one who declares it to be lawful is said to have loosened it. Now, when you bind something, it's considered bound because it imposes an obligation to the conscience, actually. Second case of binding and loosing, the Sanhedrin is able to excommunicate an individual, and that is indicated as a binding. That same court, when tshuva is done, that same court then is able to loosen him, and that person is able to come back to the community. The third case is associated with Kabbalah, and there, according to Kabbalistic literature, the power to bind and loose is understood as a spiritual force that can be used to influence the course of events and to bring about positive change in the world. Now, according to this view, the power to bind and to loose is not limited to the religious leaders or the scholars, but to every Jew who's willing to learn and practice the necessary techniques. Now, contrary to what you might be thinking, the events and personal proclivities are bound to keep a person from behaving in a negative fashion, or to loosen love to build a proclivity in a person to loose positive behaviors. I don't see anywhere in the text where we bind and loosed spiritual entities. So just get that out of your head. I know that's kind of a popular thing. As a matter of fact, we went to a convention recently where somebody is binding in spirits, and I think that is taken totally out of context. The fourth case of binding and loosing, negative commandments are bound to keep them simple. Positive commandments are loosened to keep them simple. In both cases, the technique is designed to facilitate and to increase Torah observance. So here's an example of a binding. Vayikra 19 says, in a verse, the last part of the verse says, "Nor shall there come upon you a garment of two kinds of stuff mingled together." Devarim 22:11 says, "You shall not wear a mingled stuff." Wool and linen together. I love the word stuff. So basically, your clothing, according to Vayikra 19:19, is supposed to be of one substance. let's just say wool, for instance. But there's a discrepancy between those two verses. Okay, so how do we handle that discrepancy? Vayikra says, don't wear clothing of mixed materials. Devarim 22 says, don't wear clothing of mixed material, linen and wool. Linen and wool an example of shatnez, or is linen and wool shatnez? I'm sure you get the difference. Okay, and that's where binding a negative commandment comes into play. Because if we don't bind it and we say that linen and wool is just a mere example of what shatnez is, then you can't wear polyester. You can't wear clothing that has spandex mixed in with the garments. But if you bind the command, then linen and wool are the exclusive shatnez. And so that's what we do. We bind the negative commandments. So if you have clothing that is linen and wool, and they do make clothing that combines linen and wool, that is forbidden. Unless you're a Kohen in service. Now his clothing had linen and wool mixed together. But that was just a Kohen when he was on duty. And by the way, that also includes things like blankets. So if you're going to take a blanket and throw that blanket onto you, if it's shatnez, it's forbidden. And if you're going to sit on something and have that support your weight, say like your like a chair or a chase lounge or something, if it's shatnez, then you're not supposed to use it either. Leviticus 11, and I'm sure you guys are very familiar with Leviticus 11 because it affects what you put on your plate. It says, any animal that has divided hooves and is cleft-footed and chews the cud, such you may eat. Deuteronomy 14 says, these are the animals you may eat: the ox, sheep, goat, deer, gazelle, roebuck, the wild goat, the ibex, antelope, and the mountain sheep. Do we say that we can eat any animal that divides the hoof and chews the cud? Or do we say that we can only eat those animals listed in Deuteronomy? Any animal. And why is that? Because it's a positive commandment. So therefore, we loosen it and we say that Deuteronomy that lists animals is only given examples because it's a positive commandment. So therefore, you can eat buffalo, and you can eat bison, and you can eat giraffe, the gazelle, elk, musk oxen. They kind of stink a little bit. But hey, so does goat. There could be an exception. And that exception is the prohibition against mixing meat and dairy. Now, mixing meat and dairy is located 3 times in the Torah. Exodus 23:19 says, do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. 34:26 of Shemos says, do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. And Deuteronomy 14:21 says, do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. Now, it sounds like I repeated myself. I went and I looked at each verse, and each verse is identical. I mean, even to the placing of the vowel markers. What that tells me is that there really is only one commandment that's not 3. However, the fact that it's put in 3 times tells us that each one of these cases deals with a different aspect of Halacha. Now, there is no room to make a derish to limit the command because they're identical. Instead, each passage is considered a new and unique mitzvah. So our tradition says that the first means that you cannot mix any form of meat and dairy in any form, basically any meat with any milk. Second, you are not able to cook them together. And the third is you may not derive a benefit from the mixture. So in other words, if you accidentally mix it, you can't feed it to your animals and gain a benefit. The only thing you can do is throw it away. So now that command or that law is known as basar b'chalav, which is meat in dairy. And it is a fundamental dietary law of kashrus. So if you guys are not doing it yet, I would encourage you to do so. But again, it's one of those things that once you decide that you're going to do it, then definitely don't go back on it.